Good morning.
Good morning, Luisa. Let's start at the beginning. You were born in Sevilla back in 1932. Could you tell me a little about what Sevilla was like these days?
Well, 1932 was just before the bad unrest that Spain went through. And in 1936 is when it really became bad. And I was born in Sevilla, but in 1936, my father was working in Madrid. He was a dancer and a performer and had to travel quite a bit. So we were in Madrid at that time in 36. And that's when the Civil War really began. And we had to our problem was the bombs, because they were bombing Madrid. The bombs were coming from Europe, from other parts of Europe, because the Spanish themselves did not really weren't prepared for war. But there were 5 different parties all attempting to take control. So we had bombs from all kinds of situations. And one of the bombs, my father used to talk about this, and I remember hearing the story a lot, fell and destroyed the house next to us. We lived in a building in Madrid. They were called twin towers, very small, but they were twin. And they told my father that it was our building that had been bombed and everybody killed. So he panic-stricken and left his post. He had a post that he had obligation to fill as a guard. He didn't even know how to handle this rifle that he'd been assigned. But he dropped that and went to see what had happened. And when he discovered that it was the building next to ours and that we were still alive, but the building itself had been, part of it had been destroyed, and one wall was missing, and you couldn't even really stay there. So that very same day, he went to the French embassy. At that time,
but
France.
Were the whole family in the house when the bomb fell?
Oh, yes.
Do you have any remembrance?
Oh, well, yes, I do actually. There were a situation that happened. My grandmother was living with us, and it was my mother, my other 2 sisters who were younger, and my grandmother. And my grandmother became disoriented, and she tried to go out a door, but instead of going to the part of the door where the handle was, she went into the corner and just confused and couldn't move. So we couldn't find her to be able to leave the building, and we didn't want to leave without her. And everyone was calling Felipa, Doña Felipa, Doña Felipa. And I remember that I found her, and I said, "Aquí está la abuela está aquí, Felipa está aquí." So I still remember this. They came, and we all got out of that building that day.
That's also close to the catastrophe.
Oh, yes. And there was continuous bombing. You could hear shootings. It was very dangerous to even walk the streets, because from rooftops there were people rifling when they saw it. You didn't know who really was your enemy, because it was so chaotic. It was a very, very... civil wars are the worst.
And your father took to the French embassy, hoping to get the family over to France? Then?
Yes, at that time France had opened its doors to Spanish refugees who were trying to get away from the war, and they were accepting children, women, and males under 14. So my father wasn't allowed refuge, but he still had that uniform that he had been given. So he said, "Well, I will escort this family to to France." And I remember he telling me it was like he shouted in whisper, a loud whisper, "Shh, no llamarme papá." We were not supposed to call him Papa.
No.
He was supposed to be this official guard.
Okay.
So he somehow got us on trains. We went to Valencia. I remember in Valencia, there was a problem because the what do you call where the train tracks?
Yeah.
The tracks had been bombed, and the train couldn't continue. So we had to get off the train, and in order to make it to Barcelona, we had to get rides on either buses or not buses.
On trucks.
These
The trucks.
trucks,
Yeah.
just any kind of trucks that had room would pick up people and drop them here and there. It was very spontaneous and chaotic, but we did make it to the border of we got to Barcelona, where the train would depart to go to
France.
to France,
Yeah.
to Paris.
Yeah. Okay. So, how was Barcelona like these days? Was a war going on in Barcelona?
I don't remember. I don't think it was as bad as Madrid.
No.
But everybody was trying to get away from Spain. And in Barcelona, my father did take us it was wintertime, and I remember this because I was, of course, small, and I remember seeing the overcoats and a lot of flapping. That image is in my mind when I think of that moment. And so at the train station, there were guards at the doors who accepted the people that were permitted to leave. And my mother, my grandmother, my other two sisters and I got into the train. But of course my father was not allowed. He was outside. And we got inside, and through the window we were saying our goodbyes to him. And he was giving us instructions. And we were just, saying goodbye. When the train started to move, the guard jumped off the door, and then my father realized that he had an opportunity, because those old trains used to have bars on the outside. The exterior of the train had a bar that the conductors would go on. I remember seeing that in some film. I don't really remember the situation, but when my father talked about it, he always referred to that bar, that he grabbed onto that bar, and when the train started to really go and the guard was there's nothing he could do. It had doors from the outside. He opened the door and got inside, and miraculously he was able to stay with the family. And we got to France, and in France we had the address of a Spanish lady who was receiving and giving help to Spanish refugees and telling them where to go and where to get work, and if possible. And the biggest problem, once we got there, it was a solution, but it wasn't a complete solution, because we had pesetas. My father was a very important artist, and he had a lot of peseta money, but it was totally worthless at that point. So he went to the dancing school. He said, "Okay, where's the dancing school?" And announced to everybody, "I'm here. I'm Antonio Triana. I do flamenco and so." And he started to give lessons, and got people to take the classes, and was able to increase and survive. And with time, he made contact with some other artists who also had made it to France. There were two ladies who were very important dancers, Argentinita and her sister Pilar Lopez, and they made a trio and started performing at the Salle Pleyel, which I believe still exists. It's an old theater, or it did for a long time. And they performed at the Salle Pleyel and had the good fortune that a Russian impresario named Sol Hurok, who used to bring the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo to the U.S., saw them perform, fell in love with the group, and started to give them tours out of France. They would do a tour and then come back. And during one of those tours,
when was this? Where are we now? Is it
well, we're
during?
this between 36 and 38.
Yeah, okay.
36
So
and 38.
it was still no war going on in Europe.
Oh yes, the Hitler had not started pushing in, but Franco had made it into Spain. I don't know exactly, but during those 2 years, and because while we were in France, and my father did the tours to the, I think one of them was to the U.S. or different parts. I don't really know that. I don't remember that too well. But he came back to France and realized that France was preparing for war, because there was no war yet in France. Because the how do you call the lampposts were painted black.
Okay.
And then sandbags were appearing on doorsteps, and things that he had observed in Spain, evidently. And so he realized that France was preparing for war, and said he did not want to, he wanted to take his family out, but he didn't have the permits to take 3 children, his mother, and his wife. So he said, okay, I'll start with the oldest child, and which was me. And so that next tour, I left with him. But at that point, things really fell apart. And during that tour, my mother came back to Spain because Franco had finished, but now the Hitler thing was beginning. It was getting bad in France. So my father, I guess I don't know how they communicated. No cell phones at that time. But he told her, go back to Spain. And so she came back to Barcelona, where her mother lived, and with my other 2 sisters and my grandmother. And I stayed in America with my father till he was attempting to get permits to bring them. But at that time, he was only on he himself only had a 3-month working permit, which would get renewed every time he got more work.
Yeah.
But it wasn't sufficient legal information to bring a family. So our family did not get together again till I was 16.
So you left with your father when you were about 6 or 8 years?
Yes. I was born in 32, and this was 36, 37.
Okay.
And 38 is when we were in New York. I remember that. There's some photograph somewhere where it said 1938.
So you were then a small girl touring with your father through the States.
Yes.
So how was life for a girl like?
Well, it was children aren't as aware that it isn't as things are not could be different, and I remember having to write my letters, and I had to do my homework because I wasn't going to school. I started official school very, very late in life. I was already, I think, 8 years old. But I had tareas to do at wherever. My father would leave me sometimes with a family. Spanish families were always some available somehow. And I remember staying with different families, and some of them had children, which was nice because then I contacted with them. Some of them did not. They were just older people. And that was life until we made it to California. And in California, my father did a lot of movie work, so we stopped traveling. And then my official schooling began, and that's where I learned English and grew up.
Yeah. So when this was living in hotels and like that?
Yes, hotels. And I remember, now that you say hotels, that I fell in love with a little dog that they were selling on the street. And evidently my father couldn't resist my tears. And he bought it for me, but it wasn't permitted in the hotel. And so we had to hide it and took it to the hotel. I don't know how long I had it because, of course, eventually the dog disappeared. We couldn't hang on to it. But he tried, as much as he could to satisfy a child's needs, at the time, under those circumstances.
So, when did you start dancing?
I
Yeah, when did you
I
start?
started,
Yeah.
as soon as I could walk. My father, that was his plan was for me to be a dancer.
Okay.
And I performed in New York when I was, I think, under 8 years old. I was already performing. And I had, there's photographs and things of me performing.
Okay. So that was the beginning of your
Oh,
career.
yes. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. And I enjoyed it. I remember that. And I used to go with my father to the dancing school that he taught, and I'd do my homework on the chairs or something while he gave the classes. So I was always involved in that.
Yeah. Okay. So, but at the age of 16, you left U.S. together with your.
With my father, we went to Mexico City, because in Mexico City, my father was able to get documentation. We became citizens of that country. They did. It was something else that the Mexican government did for the Spaniards, so that refugees. And that way, he was able to bring my mother and my other. Only one sister came, because one of my other sisters had a boyfriend. She says, "No, I don't want to go to America. I don't want to go to America." So she stayed, and so one sister and my mother came, and then the family was reunited temporarily, because we always had to move to perform, and it was very difficult to have a stable life.
Yeah, I can understand. And then after the war, your family was united in Spain again. Then when your father came with you to Spain?
No. After that, in school, because I went to school in the U.S., I met a young man that I eventually married. So after I lived in Mexico, we lived there 5 or 6 years. I had a correspondence with my fiancé, you might say, although it was we weren't fiancé yet, but eventually, So that correspondence kept going until I came back, and I married an American man, and my son was born in California.
Okay. How old were you?
When I was already 25, almost 25, in my early 20s, I think.
And since then, your entire life has been dancing and performing.
Yes, I did a lot of teaching, because once I was married, I couldn't travel, because up to then it was always, you worked in one place and then it was always moving. And so I started to spend more time teaching, and also I did a lot of film work. Where I did what they did called dubbing. Like I remembered playing the castanets for Sid Charisse. I don't know if you could remember that woman. She was a very lovely actress of that time. And she was, some film evidently, there was a moment that she's supposed to play castanets. And so they recorded me, and then I taught her how to kind of fake it. And then from far away, they would take my hands, and then they close up on her. The film arrangements to make it believable that she was playing. And that was very common. There was a lot of dance work for us, for the actresses who weren't true dancers but needed to interpret that role in their film.
But then looking back on your life, Luisa, or to put the question differently, where are you from? Do you feel like you're Spanish, or are you an American, or?
That's an interesting question. I actually am Spanish. When I needed to come back, and this is why I'm here now. 20 years ago, I finally was able to arrange my life in such a way that I could come back. And I went back to Triana. I went straight to Triana. I wanted to get in touch with my real roots with a different intellectual point of view. And my son was grown. I already had a couple of grandchildren, but I enjoyed my life there. I really did. It's very satisfying, easy, non-problematical life that I had, because as a Spanish artist there, I had a little bit of status, and it wasn't like
a little bit that.
But I came back, and then it was the way I talked. Everything started to change, and I became. I got to know my other cousins, and my one sister that refused to come to America. I got to know her, and she lives in Barcelona. She stayed in the Barcelona area with her husband, and she's a great grandmother also now. And so I have that point, but my roots are in Sevilla, and now Jerez. And so I'm both parts of Spain, from the north to the south.
Do you know one thing, Luisa? You're a very inspiring person.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so happy to know you.
My pleasure to meet you and to have somebody ask me these questions. To me, it doesn't seem like that's so, so unusual. People of that era, a lot of people went through a lot of problems.
Really? Really?
My situation at that time was just one of many.
Of course, but after all, you have experienced a part of the European history that I've only read about.
That's true. That's true. It is.
I sort of get closer to it hearing your story.
I see.
Thank you very much for taking the time talking to me.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, and thank you for being interested. And un beso para todos.